Hello everybody, welcome to this very first video from Jacobite Spirits. Today I am speaking to a very interesting person in the world of spirits. It is Andre de Almeida from the Inside the Cask blog. He has a varied past and indeed probably varied future coming up in spirits, and I'm very excited to be talking to you today, Andre. How are you?
Hi Jamie, I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me to this first session. I look forward to having a drink and talking a little bit about a passion of ours, which is obviously drinks and spirits, especially.
Absolutely. Will you do me a quick favor and let everybody know a little bit of background to yourself, Andre, and what has brought you into the world of spirits? What have you done over the last few years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what brought me originally into the world of spirits was actually trying to have a family. So I lived at the time in London. Myself and my wife, who's Scottish, decided to start a family, and obviously we decided that we had to come back to Scotland. So that's what kind of made us get into the world of spirits, because my job then was working for Maxim with brands such as Macallan, Famous Grouse, Remy Cointreau, Absolute Vodka, etc. And that's what kind of brought me into the world of spirits. Since then, I've worked for different companies. So I've worked for Edrington, William Grant and Sons, and I'm currently at Loch Lomond Group. So that's my kind of day job. And I've worked in the UK business, but equally internationally, domestic, as well as duty free. So quite a lot of experience within the drinks trade. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I started writing a blog because I wanted to share some of that experience called Inside the Cask, as you've mentioned, and also help other people. So one of the things I try to do with the blog is I post jobs in the drinks industry for people trying to get into or get back into the industry. Obviously I have no links. I don't generate any commercial returns on the back of the blog. It's just a hobby and really an aim to kind of try to help other people.
It's a fantastic resource. I've certainly enjoyed a lot of it myself. In fact, most recently, I think one of the most interesting and certainly most talked about articles you've written, other than the Rum is on the Rise article, of course, is the Scotch whisky graph that you've managed to pull together. A lot of research must have gone into that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And if people get a chance, go and have a look at it, because it really is fascinating.
Yeah, I've lost you there for a few seconds, but yeah, no. The idea behind the blog is I usually try to write about topics that I'm personally interested in. So for the Scotch whisky history timeline, which is what you're referring to, I was trying to basically find easy to access visual way to see the 3 golden eras of Scotch whisky. And I couldn't find it, so I decided to make one up myself. So I literally had to go into research to find out when distilleries were open and closed, when were they silent for a period of time, and obviously I will continue to update that as I get more information as well. But it is something that had a huge response. It's probably one of the most popular blog posts, and all that it's showing, it's the number of distilleries. From 1772 all the way to 2020, and obviously you can see that the kind of the visually in one page how that is affected by different world events, by different pieces of legislation, I guess, in different countries, such as prohibition in the US, and it's really interesting. I find it personally quite interesting. It's something that I try to always do, which is look back in history. Because if we don't do that, the risk is that we're gonna make the same mistakes again.
Well, absolutely, and I definitely think people should check it out. I found it really interesting myself. It kind of actually leads us into talking about that history of distilling here in Scotland, and some of the stuff that you found out about that. There's obviously a rich history here, and the future looks like it's going to broaden again. You know, what have you seen emerging over the last few years, and what have you enjoyed watching coming out of that history?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of experimentation going on right now, not just in Scotland, but in the world, especially if you talk about whiskies, but equally rums, gins, and other categories of spirits. What I found interesting is that obviously the number of new distilleries and new brands coming up, as well as some of the established ones, they are not constrained by some of the norms of the past, and they are looking to experiment more, whether that's to do with types of barley, whether that's to do with the way they complete the distillation. So there's loads of different aspects and areas where innovation can take place and is taking place right now. You've mentioned rum. I mean, it's fascinating to see the number of Scottish rums that have come up in the last few years, which is obviously benefiting hugely as well from the association of that Scotland has with the whiskey globally, because whiskey is obviously seen as a kind of marker for quality. And I have no doubt that rum, gin, and other spirits coming from Scotland are going to benefit from that.
Absolutely, and I think that's certainly something that we've been conscious of as we've progressed. You know, we've learned a lot from the centuries of learning that's out there, and we're still benefiting from that. Tell me a little bit about the last few months. You know, on the whole, how has the spirits business and industry coped with COVID, and what have you seen as the real markers, and what are you picking up as being a change in behavior or a change in trends, or is there an emergence happening now? Where are we?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with coronavirus and COVID, and obviously people being restricted in terms of how their day-to-day would usually work in international travel, etc., has obviously had a huge impact. And if anything, it has accelerated some of the trends that we were already seeing before, whether that's to do with health and people being concerned about their bodies and physical health, or whether that's to do with e-commerce and the growth of the kind of virtual world and virtual experiences. So we've seen, or I've seen certainly, a lot of that coming up more and more. I mean, if you have a look online right now, you're going to see a huge amount of virtual get-togethers. Some of the first virtual events, for whiskey, for rum, have taken place recently. Equally, the tastings, being able to access master distillers, which before maybe they were so busy they didn't have the time, because of the fact that they weren't at their distillery, they had the opportunity to talk online and be accessible. So for sure, the impact on us has been negative on one way, economically, etc., but also has had the benefit of accelerating that trend towards the virtual world. And I would expect that in future, you're probably going to have a hybrid of some sort.
Well, even the fact that we're having this conversation in the way that we're having it today is an indication of it, and of course your popularity on a lot of these events is definitely an indication of that. Not that I would expect anything otherwise, but in terms of the consumer behaviour, one of the things we're noticing, we're a small startup, and we've been going at this pretty much throughout the heat of the COVID pandemic. We, as you know, we only got into our distillery in early March, our proper distillery. So we've taken a run at this really in the middle of it, and we've definitely noticed an unexpected behaviour. I mean, we can't say it was a change in behaviour because we didn't have the data that showed anything differently, but certainly we've seen consumers really, really engage online with a product that you physically really have to be near or at least taste. But it just shows the power of brand reach and the power of background story and maybe some of the authenticity angle. What do you think that's being picked up by some of the bigger boys that the bigger industries than us?
Yeah, no, definitely. This kind of direct to consumer interaction and communication is definitely coming up, both for bigger brands as well as startups and medium-sized brands. Obviously, some are faster getting into it more quickly than others, but that's definitely a trend that it's happening right now, and I expect that will continue, because it's obviously a great opportunity for brands to learn, develop, and take that feedback directly from the consumer and make changes. So it's a different model than the traditional model for building a brand in the on-trade, for example, which obviously takes longer, it's a big investment, and you're relying on that interaction and feedback in a different manner. So we're definitely seeing changes from that perspective. And again, it's affecting everybody.
Okay, so the one of the important aspects of getting in touch with the brand is to obviously taste it. And I think one of the things that it's always been interesting for me, whenever I've visited any distillery, has been the part of the experience has been to be guided through to tasting a drink. So whether that be whiskey or indeed actually even beer, I've toured many craft breweries. And vineyards. And I think one of the interesting things, it's always handy to kind of refresh your memory on how to taste a drink. What would be your tips for tasting a spirit? And also, would you say there was anything different to tasting maybe a nice Scotch whiskey to tasting a rum or a spiced rum like the 45? Is there anything that you would say is slightly different about that?
Yeah, I mean the main difference I would say is you need to determine what you're trying to do. Is it taste for just enjoyment, or is it tasting because you want to understand what are the flavors behind it? What's exactly behind the product. So that's a very different approach. And clearly, whether you're drinking neat or you're drinking mixed, it's going to have a huge impact on your experience. Certainly, just going back to the first comment you made there about the virtual side and the fact that ultimately it's all about the tasting, it's all about the liquids. That's really the one of the interesting parts, and that has come out as the quarantine has hit all of us, is all these kind of the rise of virtual tastings, which personally I find it fascinating. I mean, usually I'd be traveling here, there, and everywhere, so I've taken certainly the time to do quite a few of these tastings. I've also given some tastings during the time. And I've enjoyed it because it basically means that you can access a lot of different liquids, different brands, at the comfort of your home, where they're guided and tutored by someone from that distillery or just amongst friends. So one of the things that I've done, for example, is I've joined one of those subscription clubs. So from my perspective, I joined the drum team online. I pay a monthly subscription. I get 6 bottles, miniatures every month. I've got some here, so you can see here. So it looks like that, and then basically what I have, and I'm doing it this Saturday actually, is myself and a few friends. Given that we can't see each other as often, we actually organize a monthly get together where we drink the whiskeys, but to be honest, not so much to do the proper nosing and taste and trying to dissect the whiskey and the flavors, but more about really just trying to have a good time, to do what drinks kind of help support, which is it's a sociable product. So we are trying to have a good time, have a chat, have a laugh, and obviously whiskey's part of that proposition.
No, absolutely. It's fantastic to see all of these innovations coming out. And, I honestly think if, we talked about this a year ago and said, I'm going to set up this business to do online tastings and send out little samples in the mail. People in the business, serious people, probably would have laughed at you straight away and just said that's not how this is going to work. So it's a great quick response. I'm really impressed at how innovative that is. But you're right. I'm actually starting to enjoy some of my friends that live around the world. I have a regular, I would say it's more monthly rather than weekly, thankfully, get together where we just call it the virtual pub. I'm sure everybody else has been talking about it. And yes, it's not as good as the real thing. But, some of these guys live, several thousand miles away. There's multiple time zones between us. This is a really interesting way and a really acceptable way to engage in a social activity, which is, enjoying a drink and having a conversation. I think
and that's the thing. It's not going to substitute going to the pub or meeting your friends face to face, having a laugh and whatnot. It's definitely not going to substitute that, but it provides a different experience. And right now, especially given that a lot of us are restricted to our countries or in some cases to our households, it gives us that connection, because ultimately we're humans. It's all about connection. You're not going to move away from that, and I don't think that's something that we need. So this just provides us another method of getting that connection with other people.
Absolutely. Well, and on that note, I think we should maybe try a little bit of the 45.
Yeah.
I see you've had a run at it already, which is always good to see.
Yeah.
I also have a bottle here. I'm going to simultaneously pour. Now, one of the things we're learning in the drinks industry, or certainly I'm learning, is very often you ask, what's your perfect pour? you know, and this is something that's been, you know, it was a new term for me. I mean, I knew the term perfect pour, but I didn't quite realize what it meant to the on-trade. And so we've had to think about that quite carefully. And I know that when we talked originally about this, I made some suggestions. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on what you think is our perfect pour, because I don't think we're right there yet. I've got an idea. And what I say to all of our customers when they buy is, look, even if you don't like rum straight, or you don't like a spiced rum straight, definitely try the tiniest amount first. Just put a little bit in a glass, maybe on a piece of ice, and see what happens, because there's something really interesting about that first taste. And then maybe when you add a mixer, you're just going to feel where that some of that flavor is coming from. So that's usually where I start out.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I'm just going to use that tumbler, but for any drink, if you want to understand a little bit more behind what's in the bottle, you definitely would take a neat first, as you said, even if that's not how you actually prefer to drink the stuff. And typically, you wouldn't necessarily use one of these glasses. You use a glass like for whiskey, a Glencairn glass, which is obviously very good at maintaining some of the vapor, some of the smell within the glass itself, so you don't just lose that completely or too quickly. The other thing you want to do is you would put a little bit of liquid, you tilt in your glass, and again, you'd be able to see the tiers or the legs of the spirit coming down, and that can give you a little bit of information as well. So first, what you'd always first do is put a little bit and check the color. And in the case of spirits, you don't generally need to be doing this. You don't need to do the same as wine. Wine, you would need to shake it to get to have the proper nosing. For spirits, you don't need that. You would have a look at the color against the light. And again, in the case of whiskey, that can tell you a little bit of information, although it can be a little bit misguided, because in whiskey you're allowed to add caramel, and therefore that can sometimes, you may not be able to notice what's behind the liquid just on the back of the collar. By tilting it and doing the around the glass, you'll be able to see the legs coming down. And again, I'll talk more from a whiskey perspective. It basically means that if it comes down quite quickly, it's light-bodied. If it comes down more slowly, it tends to be oilier, heavier kind of type of whiskey, and that's to do with the distillation process, typically. When it comes to nosing, again, you want to, try to put in your nose, but you have to be mindful of the fact that this is a spirit. It's going to be high alcoholic strength, not like a wine or something like that, and therefore you have to be take that in mind. You also would typically do it with your mouth open, which would help. And again, and after that, you do the tasting. And typically, when I would taste a spirit for the first time, I try to chew it in my mouth, which kind of helps dilute as well. But it means also that you coat the whole of your mouth. For this one, I mean, I've already had some, so I know that you're going to get the orange notes, you're going to get the ginger, licorice, and a little bit of that smoke. And it's very nice, very easy. And by doing that, you can certainly get some of those notes. Now, most people in reality are not going to drink it like this.
Yeah.
They're going to drink it mixed, or they're going to drink it with ice. And again, it's all about how they personally want to experience the drink. I would never, for whiskey, rum, or anything else, tell you how to drink your drink. Ultimately, it's a very personal experience. And I know, for example, with whiskey, that people in Brazil on the beach may drink it with coconut water fresh. It's not something that in Scotland we would do, but it's something that some people in Brazil choose to do because that's how they enjoy it.
You mean we wouldn't go to the beach in Scotland?
Well, I did that a few weeks ago, and I can tell you it's not the same experience.
I'm with you on that.
Albeit it was very nice and clean, but it wasn't the same experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
but no, it's 45 lovely spice rum. You can definitely get those notes from the botanicals, and I think Jacobite, you guys have done a tremendous job with this rum.
I really appreciate it. Actually, one of the things I was going to say is tasting it with you. even just having that conversation and going back through it. I mean, I don't know if you're a golfer. I can't remember if you're a golfer, but it reminds me of, trying to do your golf again. You set up your different shots, your feet, your grip. If you go through that process, I'm not suggesting you do it for every sip of drink that you have, but actually to try something for the first time, something you've invested in, because, craft spirits, any good quality spirit is not going to be a cheap investment. So to get the most out of that first taste, and even when you were talking me through it there, I was getting more from the rum, even though I've tried it many times. There's definitely a complexity to it. And actually, one of the other things that always surprises me, why it shouldn't surprise me, because the name is the 45 and it's 45%, but it does still catch you a little bit. There is a bit of strength in that extra few percent on it. Certainly on the finish, which I find quite warming, and it's quite nice. It definitely, for me, the licorice comes through at the end, that flavour of licorice. We don't put licorice in it, but we have some botanicals that release that. And for me, I quite like that. It's not too strong and it's not too aniseed.
No, very easy to drink. But again, I'm not sure if it's because also I'm used to drinking kind of higher ABV, higher strength products. So this is not challenging that way. But I know from talking to people that, especially people that are not working in the industry, that they can find challenging to taste like this, even if it's just to appreciate the flavors. And that's when you have to explain to people, if you drink wine, if you drink beer, the ABV on that, the alcohol is going to be much lower. So for you to have a similar experience, it may be that, you put it in your mouth and chew a little bit, which will help to bring it down. Or equally, as some people do for some spirits, add a bit of ice or add a bit of water, which again can have a different impact on the drink inside the glass. But it's all about making it accessible and making it enjoyable to your personal palate.
Well, that's actually one of the main missions that we've been on, as you know, is to try and make this an accessible drink, something that, is versatile enough to be a straight sipping spiced rum alongside the mixer and indeed the cocktail. Towards the end of this, I might try the spiced rum Negroni, which is actually one of these things that's been taking the spiced rum world or the rum world by storm. A lot of people are moving the traditional gin Negroni into the rum category, and it's working very well. Just to go a little bit into the flavor there and the role of the cask, because you were instrumental in helping us source our casks for our rum, which if people don't know, we finished the rum in a bourbon whiskey cask that Andre helped us source. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the impact of a cask on a spirit? And obviously the whiskey business is very well known, but there's a lot of other things going on there. Can you give it? And first, also, do you get anything? Are you getting any of the cask notes in that in our rum? I wouldn't be an expert enough to know where the cask notes were, but for me, there always is this slightest hint of Scotch whiskey in there. I don't know whether it's just the spirit or whether it is we're actually pulling that out of the bourbon whiskey cask.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing with casks is that they obviously are usually oak. So oak is what's used as the wood of choice for many of the industries, including Scotch whiskey. When you put a spirit within a cask made of oak, there's three main elements or main processes that take place. A process of subtraction, addition, and interaction. Okay, so in terms of subtraction, so taking something away, one of the ways that the cask can interact with the spirit inside it is that it can remove some compounds, some flavor notes that you are not keen to have in the finished product. So an example of that is heavily charred cask, so a cask that's been, where you've burnt the inside of the cask. You get this almost like a charcoal layer inside the cask. And when you put the spirit in there, that can help almost like filter out some of those flavor notes. So for example, sulfur. Sometimes you get sulfury notes, which most people don't tend to want that in their finished product. So the charcoal layer can remove some of that. In terms of addition, one of the obvious ones, especially for casks, is you can get the addition of vanilla compounds, so vanillin, into the spirit. And again, so you can get that kind of sweetness, especially from an ex-American cask that used to have bourbon inside, for example. So you will get that sweetness coming out of it. And interaction, because again, wood is porous. You're going to get that interaction with the environment. Having that liquid within the wood means that oxygen and other elements will also get into the cask and help the interaction between the liquid and the wood. So an example of that you tend to see, for example, is for casks that are matured near the coast. The coast tends to be close to the sea. The sea means that you get that saltiness in the air and the environment. And over time, especially if you're keeping your casks in a location which is exposed to the environment, such as a dunnage warehouse, you would get that saltiness getting into the spirit, because during the summer the wood will expand, during the winter it will contract, and over time the elements from the environment, such as the salt in the air, will get into the liquid, into the cask. So those are just 3 examples of 3 different processes that can have an impact on the liquid inside the cask itself.
It's fascinating, and I love that that saltwater profile. I know that I've tried some whiskies that have exactly that going on in there, and it really is amazing that that's how the environment can impact on it. So talking,
no salt is added to the liquid.
I know. I should point out that the 45 uses smoked seaweed in some of our in our botanical composition, and it does give the faintest salinity. Actually, now that I haven't had a sip for a few minutes, I can get a little bit of that salted caramel flavor coming through at the very end. So it's definitely interesting, and people often think it's a bit crazy to have a salt profile in a drink, but obviously salt it's important for unlocking a lot of flavor sometimes for us. Just to go back
again.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, but there are, if you really want to get into it, there's obviously different types of casks used will impart different flavors as well. So we know, for example, that, I've already mentioned the ex-bourbon casks that come from the US and use American oak, but clearly in the whiskey industry, the other type of cask that's quite popular as well is ex-sherry casks from Europe. Though the type of wood is different because it tends to be tighter, more compact, and also the type of notes that you can get from an ex-sherry cask. Because of the fact that sherry is a fortified wine, you get elements such as dried fruits, for example, especially if it's a first fill cask. So first fill meaning that's the first time that you're obviously putting whiskey, in this case, inside that cask once the sherry has been removed. So again, different types of casks give you different characteristics and can influence the liquid inside in different ways. Clearly, time is an important factor because the longer the time, the more impact that's going to have within the spirit inside it. And one of the watch outs actually is you have to be careful that you don't overdo it, because if you have a very old liquid that's been inside a cask, whether that's whiskey or something else, the danger is that it becomes too oaky, too woody, because the wood is overpowering what was inside. So you're always having to, taste it, sample it, to make sure that you get that balance. And ultimately, with any spirit, it's always about balance.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So I was going to ask a little bit about rum on the rise, and I know that that's a battle cry that we're very confident in saying a lot of the time, and I know you have a blog article entitled just that. What does that mean, really, and where does it fit in the spirits industry as a whole, and what's exciting about it?
What's exciting for me is diversity. It's producing something different, something new, because ultimately rum, a big chunk of the rum sales in the UK, for example, is white rum. And what I find interesting is that a lot of the rum in Scotland that we're seeing come through, it's spice rum, it's golden rum, it's different flavor profiles being created, some which have been aged in a cask, whether that's a short period or not. And again, that's really interesting. And again, using those that provenance that whiskey has, but trying to bring that into rum. I think the biggest challenge that rum in Scotland and Scottish rum has is awareness, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the blog post, because I started to see more and more about Scottish rum, but I didn't see anywhere that was highlighting all of the Scottish rums that were available right now. And that's what I was trying to capture. So I was trying to capture what's available where, because again, you've got it in the Borders, in Glasgow, with 45 or just outside. You've got it in Orkney. So it's great to see all this, wonderful Scottish rum coming up all over Scotland. But the main challenge remains awareness, not just within the UK, but also beyond.
Do you think that Scotland can perform in this category? And where do you think that it has potential to go beyond, these islands?
I think so, because if you look at Scotland, small population, very small country relative to the world, and yet look at the Scotch whisky industry, huge around the world and really well known. Gin, obviously there's quite a bit of a trend towards gin in the last few years, or for a while now, which continues to grow globally, and not in every market. Obviously, different markets growing at different pace, but a big chunk of that is Scottish gin that's being produced in Scotland, and I have no doubt that they're benefiting from the provenance and the attitude and views that globally consumers have about Scotland, about the country, nature, Scotch whisky production, all that history. And I have no doubt that will give rum brands in Scotland a platform to continue in that path as well.
Well, fingers crossed. That's what we're looking for, certainly at Jacobite Spirits. I think that is a perfect place to leave it, Andre. Really appreciate your time, your insight. We look forward to continuing to keep up with your blog, Inside the Cask, and keep us posted and keep a watch on rum for us, will you?
I'll try my best, and I hope you're going to show me your Negroni now. I have to say the last 45 I had was with ginger ale. I quite enjoyed with some ginger ale and ice.
That's exactly what I was thinking. So as we've been working through our perfect pour, it was either going to be, we've experimented a lot with ginger beers, as you probably know. I personally think that there's too much going on in a lot of ginger beers. A subtle ginger beer works. Actually, I think a ginger ale is a really good way to drink it. So you're absolutely right. So I'll quickly do a Negroni. I've got some ice over here in my little flask. Give me 2 seconds. So it's just reminded me when I went to get the ingredients for this. Throughout lockdown, I've really been experimenting with vermouth, and I heard the other day on a radio program that vermouth has been one of the interesting growth markets. In throughout lockdown, people experimenting a little bit more, and I didn't realise that I was part of that trend. So I have been. I found I've tried Italian, I've tried French, and actually one of the interesting ones, I'm going to show this little one off here. This is a Spanish vermouth. I don't know if you're familiar with that one there. It's probably disappearing in the background. Lusto. So one of the interesting things is it talks about the coriander and oranges being used in this. So it's not as sweet maybe as some of the big brand vermouth that people will be used to. I quite like it, but I noticed when I went to get it back out, I was like, oh, I'm starting to run out of it. So the easy thing about a Negroni, I'm sure a lot of people already know this, is that it's equal parts. It's 3 parts that make up the drink, which is why it's one of my favorites. There's nothing else that goes in there other than great alcohol. So 1 part vermouth, 1 part Campari. Don't worry, I've got another bottle of Campari ready to go. And then the difference that people will know in this compared to a normal Negroni is you'd usually use gin. In this case, I'm going to use a generous shot of the 45. And then finish it off with a little piece of orange peel if I can get it back out of my flask here. I put it on ice. And what I should have done is just peeled it while I was making it. But for some reason, I over-prepared. So I'll stick this on. I don't know if it'll survive very well on ice. There's a little bit of orange peel in there. definitely smells different. So instead of those gin notes that you get a lot from a Negroni, because I think the gin really kind of lifts out before you taste it, it's all that. It's a bit more orange peel. It's definitely the rum that I'm smelling. Better one for taste. Sláinte.
Sláinte. I've got my ginger ale in 45, yeah.
It's good. So what I like about it in particular, and I think a lot of people are noticing this as well, and I think this is one of the reasons that that gin is always in there. But when you put the rum in there and the Campari balances it, that bitterness against the sweet, but it definitely accentuates that orange profile and then a little bit of the licorice. And I think that just a slight change in vermouth. I mean, that vermouth I think is maybe a couple of quid more expensive than the main brand that everybody thinks of when they're thinking of a red vermouth or a white vermouth. And it's transforming. And you can buy it online. It comes to your door sometimes the next day, depending on who you use. And it definitely transforms it. And it's a cracking drink to get started with, particularly if you're looking forward to catching up with friends, because it gets to your thirst fast, as they would say.
Yeah, no, and again, that's what you're trying to do, isn't it? It's all about that balance, trying to match those kind of botanicals that you've got on your 45 with the other ingredients in the cocktail.
Absolutely, it's a great way to start or finish a Wednesday, depending on where you are in the world and what you've got on next. Well, anyway, look, it was really great to speak to you, Andre. We'll finish this up now, and we'll say goodbye for now, but we'll hopefully see you again.
Thank you very much, Jim.